In this video demonstration, we're going to talk about the updated lamination process. So we originally had a basic lamination system set up where you could put a glossy kind of or a matte and textured lamination on your file. And the original way of doing it was you needed a spot cover in your file, but you no longer need that. So first of all, we've got a design here. This is one that we did with Sharp over in the US on the Sharp BP1200S. And it was done on the unifoil silver foil substrate and with Duplo, the 3D raised varnishing system. And also the design was all done using ColorLogic. So this is using the ColorLogic white ink system. So this is a perfect application for V3R. V3R is one of the few companies out there in visualization that is legally allowed to visualize ColorLogic files. Reason being, I also own half of ColorLogic and I'm the developer of that system, so seems natural. Okay, so first of all, let's set the file up. Anything with a warning symbol means it needs to be configured. In this case, ColorLogic separation is in, but we don't know what we're going to do with it. So how are we going to print it? So we're actually going to be printing this on with a white ink, and we're going to be printing on a metallic substrate. So we need to go to the substrate, and we need to switch over to the foil substrate. Okay, so we've now set that up. Now, what I want to basically explain, I'm going to turn a few things off for now, is how we can work with the lamination process. So at the moment we have foil substrate, we've got the varnish, but let's add a lamination. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, go to the little plus symbol, go to Add Flood Layer, and then scroll down to Lamination. Click on Confirm Mapping, and that will then set up a laminate over the top. So let's just show you that on and off, on and off. So when you're working with lamination, one thing that laminate isn't just completely over the top, full on, reflective, bright, stonking, you know, everything's just like a mirror. It doesn't work that way. What you get is different levels depending on the manufactured material and also whether you're going for more like a satin lamination or a matte lamination. Now, when you put gloss lamination, so for example, we can dull it down to whatever version we want. So we might say, well, actually, that's more in keeping. But what you also get is you get when you reduce the gloss level down. If you put a matte lamination, it has to diffuse and run down that foil substrate. So if you notice now, our foil substrate is not as reflective because we have the lamination over it. If we push the lamination up, then we get that foil reflectivity back. So lamination isn't just a flat plane, it's got surface appearance to it itself, the depth of it. It all affects the physics of how everything underneath it appears. Now, speaking of which, if we're going to laminate, we will be putting the Duplo to the top. So let's do that now. Let's bring it over to the top so it's no longer be affected by that lamination process. So let's say that in our lamination, we're going for like a matte or satin lamination. So we've now got a realistic appearance of that laminate. We can also add in texture, just to show you what I mean. Let me just whack this up and let's add some texture in it and let's zoom in. So if you want to, we can create that microscopic texture. You can see that there in this area here. Or if I move it out, let's go to get a bit of color. And there we can see that kind of orange peel type textured effect. And we can control that depending on how much you want in. I'm going to leave it off for now, just to explain what we're doing here. Okay, so let's bring that lamination down to more like a satin. So if we go to the left, it goes matte, and if it goes to the right, it goes gloss. Now when you're going gloss over black should darken down, so in these darker areas here, the contrast areas you've designed should go darker, they shouldn't go lighter. So if you see here, we are not reducing that grayness. The grayness comes in areas where you've got highlight, specular highlight in your file. So when we go to matte, it will slightly dull down the colours a little bit. So it's all inside there. Now, speaking of dulling down the colours, at the moment we don't have any dulling happening on the colours. All we're doing is changing the gloss level. So we're going to a matte effect, which affects the substrate below it, or we go gloss. Okay, so that's the fundamental basics of matte and gloss. Now, if I am using a matte, what happens with matte is you get a reduction in the colour underneath on the ink. So we've got a matte veil. So what we can do here is we can actually reduce it down, and it kind of lightens the colours. You know, when you print with a laminate, excuse me, a matte laminate would typically have the colours will go slightly lighter. So we can control all that. So gloss level, we've got the texture, and we've got that matte veil, so we can fine tune the lamination process. Now it's much more sophisticated than that, because that is just one part of the process. So let me just switch that off and I'll explain what's happening. So let's switch off all of the layers. So we have a foil substrate, and we had matte and gloss laminate. So let's just actually bring this down to matte, even though it's not switched on at the moment. So if I switch on my lamination layer, we can see it's diffused that foil. It's gone more of a matte appearance, which it should do. Now, what happens when you put a varnish over the top of matte lamination? Well, for those of you who know the printing industry, have done this before, if you put a spot UV, like a Duplo, Scodex, UV varnish over the top of a foil that's got matte lamination, it creates what we would call in the industry over here as a burn back. What it means is that you no longer have the matte properties. The gloss cancels out the matte reflection. So if we switch on, let me just try and demonstrate this in a slightly different way. Let's open up a separation. Okay, so if we look at this at the moment, let's turn off the matte lamination. So when we're looking at this ink at the moment, we have magenta printing over the top of the foil, so it's highly reflective. Now that in itself is a bit false. We'll get onto that in another video tutorial, but what we're going to demonstrate first of all is what happens with the flood laminate. So when we put a lamination on there, it dulls down, so we now have that dull magenta printing over the dull foil, which is correct. So that in itself is a characteristic of how you need to be able to be rendering substrates with inks and lamination layers. But when we print a varnish over the top like Duplo, and watch what happens now when I bring this on, it pings back to that full-on, bright, stonking effect. And you get that because the foil, if you look at the little droplets here, for example, wherever the foil is coming through, now what we're going to have to do is put on the Color Logic layer, so let's make it a bit more realistic. We'll put on the cyan, the yellow, and the black. So now when we look at this, we have the varnish over certain areas, and where we have the foil, like these little droplets, that comes back as full foil. And the same thing if we look at the Color Logic logo, that's always a classic place to look. The Color Logic logo is back to full foil. So that varnish on the actual Color Logic layer, there you can see we've gone dull because we've got the matte lam, put on the Duplo, and it pops back that silver foil. So lamination isn't just a singular process of, oh, let's put a plastic laminate over the top and it's glossy or it's matte. You have so much more control over the appearance of it. So top tips when you're doing rendering, and if you're using any other system out there, if it doesn't allow you to control the specular highlights, the color pinning underneath, the matte effect of the laminate over foil substrates, the burn back or the bringing back of the spot gloss over the top of the matte to get your full-on chrome foil effects. If you're not getting any of that, then there's something not right in the rendering. So that's what you should always be looking for in rendering software. So whether you're using this or any other software, that'll be my top tip. Does it actually match reality in printing? So we've got a background in printing, pre-press, material science. We've got a whole range of skill sets with us at Chaos. And we put all that to practice to make it all work. Now I did mention there's one other contributing factor. And I will do another video tutorial on this one, but for now this was just all about the masking, the flood laminate. We can obviously mask that out so we can then see what our design would look like. So in reality, that is more true to life to what you would get on your print. So the foil's been knocked down by that soft touch matte laminate type effect. You've got the spot UV over the top, we've got the beautiful reflections, we've got clean, accurate colour, and that is how rendering should be done. Now, last thing I want to just mention, because it does follow on to the next video tutorial, is basically the effect of ink over the top of substrate. So when I put, say, a cyan over the top of the substrate here, what you actually get is a matte effect from the ink. So there's a control down here in the foil substrate, ink matte control. So it's a new feature we're adding in, and I'm going to be doing a separate video on it, but just to give you a quick look on it, and it's very simple. When you print cyan, magenta, yellow, black, neon pink, white, or any other of the inks over the top, you don't get that full brightness coming through, especially on like the process inks like this. So what I mean is, if we then add the matte control, we can actually diffuse the ink, because when you print 4-color inks, they don't have that same gloss level. It's not like shine coming through it. They've got a matte surface to it. So we can actually control that and bring that down to match what will be more realistic to printing over the top of foil. So you could then say, okay, when I'm printing on foil, my 4-color inks look more like that. Now that's just the very basic of it. Do watch the other video tutorial to explain what it means. So set that up to, first of all, how your actual design is going to look, and then you can play around and say, okay, well, I've got my inks right. Now when we put the surface level of the gloss over the top, is that correct? So if it's more glossy, so you can fine tune it and match it so that you get it as accurate as you can. So my top tip would be, set your base material first. So foil in there, we set a matte control of about 0.4 when it first loads, which is about right for most materials. So when you then print everything over the top with your white CMYK, and then we put on the flood layer and the Duplo, our lamination can be matched to that. So then when we put the lamination over it, we say, okay, well, that is the way it works. So when you've set it all up, you can save it as a default. So every time you come in and use it, it will set it up the correct way. And same with the base materials. You can always go in here and save as a default, and your foil settings will save. So that's the top tips on lamination. It's the new advanced physics behind the way that V3R works. So like I said, when you're looking for 3D rendering software, and there's a few different ones out there. You can look at things like IC3D and ESCO, two of the big powerhouses in the industry on how to render and do embellishments. I mean, they're not specifically tailored for doing what we're doing here. They're very much in the realm of whiskey box packaging. You know, you take a bottle, you fill it up with liquid, you put a label on the front, you put a cap on the top, and you can spec every part of that, from the colour of the liquid to the foil around the rims, and then you can spin it around in a box, open it up, and stick it on a supermarket shopping shelf. That's what they do. We are partners over at ColorLogic with the ESCO and IC3D teams. They also support the ColorLogic system. But this is V3R. So anyway, just wanted to point that out, that you know, if you are looking for rendering systems, do make sure it actually does what it's supposed to do on the press. If it doesn't, it's not really much use. Okay, so there we go, the new lamination process.